I could have been permanently injured or hospitalized or even killed. Who knows? So something's got to be done with it.
That Army veteran says he received these serious injuries after being jumped by St. Tammany Parish deputies. Good evening, I'm Karen Swenson.
And I'm Natalie Shepard. In recent weeks, Katie Moore's Law and Disorder series has raised some big questions about how the St. Tammany Sheriff has handled problems with his deputies.
And tonight we have another example for you. Less than 2 months ago, a U.S. Army veteran posted on Facebook he was having a bad night. Well, that night went from bad to worse when 5 St. Tammany deputies arrived. As Katie and our partners at the New Orleans Advocate report, deputies who were supposed to help the man hurt him instead.
Clearly know what that sound is. I've been in law enforcement way long enough.
It all started with a Facebook post.
It actually wasn't one of my worst nights. I was just having a bad night. Somebody, I don't know who it was worried enough that they called for a welfare check on me.
911 location of your emergency.
20, 30 minutes later, I guess, Pearl River police officer and Pearl River Fire Department EMTs came to my door.
Chris Cambray is a former National Guard soldier, a military police officer for 11 years. Now he carries the invisible wound that service so often leaves, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Cambray struggles with anxiety and depression.
After speaking to my own officer, he was very calm and just didn't want to go to the hospital.
This incident report from the Pearl River Police Department details what happened next. The local fire chief had asked Pearl River Dispatch to call the St. Tammany Sheriff's Office for backup because of Cambray's military training, just in case. The report says Cambray had, quote, previously mentioned suicide by cop. 5 St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's deputies arrived and approached Cambray with rifles drawn.
I heard somebody ask, is he armed? Pam turned around and told him, no, he's not armed. And I heard it too, so I raised up my shirt, like really high, and I turned all the way around so they could see.
After putting their guns in the car, one of the deputies shined a light in Cambray's face.
Take a couple of steps back, and I looked behind the shed, and by the time I turned back around, next thing I know, I hear an asp come out.
The report says one of the deputies shouted, "I'm tired of dealing with your expletive. Get down on your knees." They tased Cambray.
And he's screaming at me to stop resisting. And I'm thinking to myself, as I'm being tased, I'm not resisting. I can't resist. I can't move.
We hardly ever use an ASP anymore. The taser is good enough to get somebody, they normally fall on the ground, and they comply, we handcuff them, and we pick them up.
J.J. Jennings is the Pearl River police chief. That department's report says the 5 deputies, Chad Melendez, Chris Harmon, Ryan Hopkins, Roger Gattardi, and Jason Wilson, jumped on top of Cambray. One of them continued to beat him with a baton.
They roughed me up pretty good. I mean, I had bruises from the top of my leg all the way down to my knee. The bottom of my rib cage was all bruised up. The side of my face from right about here all the way down was bruised and lacerated.
After Cambray was beaten and tased and left on the ground here outside of his trailer, the report says the deputies packed up and left, and the EMTs took Cambray to the hospital. He was never arrested or charged with any crime. Remember, this was supposed to be a welfare check.
So you did nothing to disturb the peace, you did nothing to cause a ruckus, you simply posted something on Facebook.
Correct. I didn't even so much raise my voice.
I don't understand what he did wrong to even deserve to be tased or baton, but I wasn't out there.
Chief Jennings says he reached out to St. Tammany Sheriff Randy Smith the next day. Cambray wanted to file a complaint with Internal Affairs.
The desk sergeant went in the back. He came back and said none of the higher up is on, around right now.
There's no number listed for the public to call to file a complaint on the sheriff's website. So his family member sent an email and set up an appointment to go back and file the complaint the next day. Cambray says the officer tape recorded his statement and took pictures of his injuries.
The last thing they said to me after they took my statement was, sometimes these things don't get resolved because there's not enough evidence. And that, in my mind, I knew what they meant by that. That meant it was going to get swept under the rug.
2 weeks later,
they never contacted me. I ended up calling them for him to tell me that the case is closed due to unsubstantiated evidence.
After we found out that the calls that they decided the case is closed, that their officers handled it properly. Then it was turned over to the DA's office, which is now also looking into this case.
District Attorney Warren Montgomery has not filed charges against the officers. However, Montgomery said, quote, "After a preliminary investigation, I have referred this matter to federal authorities for their determination if there was any possible violation of federal civil rights."
There's an operations manual to tell you on how to handle stuff when you have hands-on with people. Nowhere does it say it's okay to beat somebody, tase them, spray them if you use pepper spray, and then let them go home.
They never once identified themselves to me. They never spoke to me. Nothing. They just pretty much came in, beat me up, and left.
The visible wounds they left behind have since healed, but the added invisible ones piled on to his daily struggle.
Now, Sheriff Smith declined an interview request for this story, but his spokeswoman said they reviewed the facts of the case and found the deputies followed their use of force policy when dealing with a, quote, non-compliant individual. Then this afternoon, the sheriff's office posted a more extensive statement on Facebook saying the deputies had a physician's order to take Cambray into protective custody. Pearl River's police chief says they had no knowledge of that and says they were simply conducting a welfare check. And the sheriffs were called as a backup by the fire chief. The sheriff's Facebook post described the incident as a brief struggle. They admitted the officers tased Cambray, but they did not mention the beating. And we developed this story with our partners at The Advocate, and of course you can read more online and in the newspaper tomorrow.
What about the firefighters or the EMTs who responded? Did they have anything to say to you?
The fire chief didn't want to talk about the case because of the investigation, so he told our partners at The Advocate that he wouldn't be able to comment on it. So we don't know whether or not there was this order or what the status of that was.
Right, so they took him to the hospital, but did they consider that protective custody?
I guess they consider that protective custody, and then the sheriff's deputies didn't actually go to the hospital with him. They had the Pearl River police officer, who was the only one on duty that night in the town, go to the hospital with him in Slidell and take the handcuffs off of him because he was handcuffed and put on the stretcher, at least according to the report.
Very compelling story, Katie.